From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the movie The Neverending Story, released in 1984, starring Barrett Oliver, Noah Hathaway, and Tammy Stronach, directed by Wolfgang Petersen. The synopsis is: Bastian is a boy who is grieving the loss of his mother, dealing with bullies at school, and avoiding a dreaded math test. As an escape, he reads a magical book about the wondrous world of Fantasia. The story was based on the 1979 German fantasy novel The Neverending Story by Michael Ende. It was number 1 on Germany's bestseller list for 113 weeks and remained on the list for 332 weeks. The original edition was printed using red and green text. The red writing represented the human world events, and the green writing represented the events that had taken place in the fantasy world of Fantastica. It was also initially only printed as a hardcover, because Ende wanted the reader to feel as if they were experiencing the story to perpetuate the never-ending part of the story. It was translated into English and published in England and America in 1983. In total, it was translated into at least 36 languages, selling more than 8 million copies worldwide. Even before it was translated, German producer Bernd Eckinger saw his children reading the book, and they urged him to make a film out of it. He agreed to do it and acquired the rights to the book, paying Ende only $50,000 and agreed to keep him on board as a script advisor. Although the movie was produced in Germany, it was decided to make the film for American audiences to capitalize on that market. Wolfgang Hermann Weigel and Michael Ende put together an initial screenplay, and additional dialogue was also added by Robert Easton. Eventually, many of the changes to that script displeased Ende, and he was excluded from the final decision-making process during the filmmaking. In many ways, the film follows the main characters and the groundwork for the world of Fantastica, but it also veers off into its own philosophical structure. I'll be going over the specifics as we get deeper into the review. On the topic of the world of Fantastica, it was changed to Fantasia, which is estimated to be the proper English translation. Another early decision was to cover the first half of the book to fit a reasonable feature film screen time, and I think that was such a good decision. However, it did change the impact of the story. It sacrificed a lot of the detail that was in the book concerning the themes influencing the main character. But for the medium of film, the ideas needed to be brief and less mysterious as it was in the book. Now the pacing. At 1 hour and 42 minutes, it's a lot longer than any other kids movie, and the pacing does have a few lumps in it where you have scenes with opposing themes back to back on each other. The book follows a similar pacing, so it may not have been something that they could actually have helped in this case. Now the challenge. The story starts off with the depressing life of a boy named Bastian, who is facing all kinds of issues mentioned in the synopsis. Although the amount of screen time for Bastian is not very much, the story really unfolds because of the trauma in his life and the people he interacts with. While escaping bullies, Bastian enters Carl Conrad Coriander's antique bookstore. One book in particular that Coriander is reading is a mysterious book called The Neverending Story, with a symbol that is called the Orin, with 2 snakes engaged and eating each other's tails. Creating this kind of infinity symbol is also referring to the story that never ends. The book itself is a portal into the world of Fantasia. It has been described as the world of human fantasy, a place where hopes and dreams of mankind can live. There's a strong relation to what happens in the real world. actually happens in Fantasia. Because people on Earth are losing their hopes and dreams, Fantasia is being threatened by a mysterious force called the Nothing. In the story, the Nothing is a metaphor for grief, depression, apathy, and it causes a lot of the characters in the story to simply give up on life. It really takes a mature audience to recognize that it's talking about suicide. Now, what's really interesting about this is in the real world, many people who are depressed express that they are feeling numb or they're not able to feel anything. And some people say they feel so much that they turn to things like alcohol or drugs or medication to turn off those feelings so they can feel numb in order to cope. Now, the Nothing can also represent death because some people believe that there isn't anything after death. We learn a lot about the Nothing through a character called Gamork. He looks like a giant, scary wolf in the movie, but he's actually a werewolf in the book who is a human being in the real world. Isn't that really cool? You know, look, that's a prequel right there. And I'm so curious about his story, like what's going on with that. I would love to see someone somewhere expand upon that in sort of a mini-series or something like that. But anyway, I believe that he represents fear in Fantasia. It's interesting because within the human mind, we can also imagine a lot of fearful things. And that is why Fantasia is full of odd creatures or even scary creatures and characters in the film and in the book. Gamork is the fear that our protagonists must face in order to defeat depression. Gamork explains to the audience that he works for a power behind the Nothing, and the book describes that power as the Manipulators. This is getting so fascinating because when I first saw this movie, I never really realized how deep it went. But the Manipulators are actually humans in the real world that want to transform human hopes and dreams from Fantasia into lies in the real world in order to control humanity. What? This is really intense. Most people think that this is just a dumb kids movie with puppets and children, but oh no. I also think it's important to note that Michael Ende witnessed Nazi Germany during World War II as a very young boy and was in Munich during air raids which traumatized him and affected his views of the world. This story is perhaps a glimpse of that without being so bold as to point fingers at anyone in particular. Back to the Nothing. This apathy that is happening in the real world is literally destroying the lands of Fantasia, which is also making the ruler of Fantasia, the childlike empress, terribly ill. This is why the challenge is so intense in the story, and from a writing standpoint, I think Ende was a genius to set up such a great threat. Now for the empathy. For me, the empathy was there immediately because of the super adorable little boy, Bastian Balthazar Bucks, who is lovable right away. He's so cute. It hurts me to see him suffer so much in life. The most significant thing that he's dealing with is the loss of his mother. He dreams about her at night and he's given little to no support from his father than to tell his son, sure, people die, move on. And I think that's pretty cold. He actually comes off looking a bit like a jerk. However, upon heavy study, you can see that he deeply cares about his son. By the way he looks at Bastian, there's concern on his face, not contempt. He doesn't want his son to prolong his suffering by holding on to the memory of his mother. Bastian's grieving is affecting his schoolwork as he's failing his math class and neglecting his responsibilities. In the big picture, those things matter to ensure that Bastian will have a good life when he grows up. But there could be a great deal of mental damage being done by not allowing him to properly grieve. By the way, did anyone else do that silly thing with their fingers when you were a kid? I mean, I spent hours doing this. And every once in a while you could catch me doing it today. This film seems to capture childhood beautifully. For Bastian's dad, moving on is the most practical solution. A little window into his psyche can be seen when you see him drink an orange juice, raw egg mixture, which used to be a quick breakfast to get protein, fat, and vitamin C in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, before we knew about the dangers of that pesky thing called salmonella. It was also a hangover cure, which also coincides with the possibility of Bastian's dad being an alcoholic to deal with his own grief. On the other hand, Bastian has an entire breakfast laid out before him. This shows that Bastian's dad is looking after his child better than he is looking after himself. Bastian encounters some bullies on his way to school that put him in a dumpster. To get away from them, he hides in Coriander's bookstore, who is reading the Book of Oren, also known as the Neverending Story. It's hard to tell whether Coriander is a good guy or a bad guy, because he's intentionally baiting the book for Bastian to desire. In the movie, Bastian desires the book only because it can offer him the opportunity to be someone else. But in the book, Bastian wants the never-ending story because he wants to experience a story that doesn't end. It's a slight change on the motivation. Bastian steals the book and takes it to the school attic to read, avoiding the dreaded math tests. Bastian is a good kid at the heart of it, but because of his narrow view of the world, he can only see his own suffering. So he avoids the challenges of life and acts on his own thrill, and falls for the temptation of the book. When Bastian reads the book, he is immediately connected to his alter ego, the hero, Atreyu of the Plains people, who enjoys hunting the purple buffalo. The name Atreyu means fearless, from the ancient Greek word Atreus. In Sanskrit, Atreyu possibly means great warrior. His appearance is literally created from Bastian's imagination of what he wishes he could be. One construct of the story is that the connection between Bastian and Atreyu is pulling Bastian closer to being transported to Fantasia and saving it. As Atreyu faces each phase of his adventure during his journey, Bastian becomes more and more emotionally attached. For instance, Bastian cries along with Atreyu at the loss of his horse Artax in the swamps of sadness because he knows what it is to lose someone. It's one of the most memorable scenes in the film that traumatized a lot of young viewers. I was also so glad that the film allowed the audience to sit with Atreyu for a little while afterwards to process what happened, so we could bond with him. Next, suddenly Atreyu gets the idea to seek out the ancient turtle that lives in the swamps, Morla, who has been in the swamps for so long that they don't even care about anything. Prolonged exposure to sadness can lead to apathy. I do believe that Ende created this character and many of the characters in Fantasia to represent shadows of what Bastian was facing with his father's apathy. Atreyu is protected by Oren, the necklace that was given to him by the childlike empress, so he doesn't succumb to the swamps when his horse died. But eventually, after confronting apathy in the form of Morla, he slowly succumbs and is almost taken by his fear in the form of Gmork. The only thing that saves him is luck in the form of the luck dragon Falkor. In order to save Fantasia, Atreyu must see the Southern Oracle. On the way, he meets a helpful gnome couple that leads him to the first gate of the Oracle, which tested his self-worth. The next gate was a mirror that showed him his true self. In the reflection of the mirror is none other than Bastian, reading the book of Oren in the attic. And my goodness, my mind was blown when I saw that. Atreyu's true self is Bastian? Yes, because he's imagining himself as Atreyu as he's reading the book. Atreyu then bumps into a creature called the Rockbiter, who tells him of his fruitless efforts to save his friends from the nothing. He says with remorse in his voice, looking down on his hands, These look like strong hands. And I love this scene because it shows the audience that the stakes are really high. At this point, the rockbiter is ready to give up fighting against the nothing, so he's pretty much suicidal. It's a sad story, and it's really heavy. At that time, I was about 14 years old, and watching this movie, I never knew this was actually what he was meaning when he was talking about giving up. It was deep. Atreyu then faced his fear in the character Gamork at his lowest point, and he defeated him. He was almost taken by the nothing when he was saved again by luck, Falkor. Atreyu finally made it to the ivory tower to tell the childlike empress that he failed. And Atreyu discovers that his adventures were part of the strategy to lure the human child to Fantasia, teaching us that sometimes the road to success is through failure. What a wonderful lesson! The childlike empress then looks right into the camera, breaking the fourth wall and the illusion of the movie to talk directly to Bastian and to the audience. She acknowledges that Bastian read the Book of Orin knowing that, following Atreyu's journey, and she also acknowledges the movie's audience following Bastian through his experience too. I just love that because it's a wonderful moment in the film wherein the never-ending story never ends as long as someone watches the film, and we are now a part of the story. What an ingenious way to allow the audience to partake in the story and keep us invested. Now, the technical aspects. In the hands of such a perfectionist like Wolfgang Petersen, originally the 3-month shoot ended up taking a whole year due to reshoots. Became the most expensive film ever to be produced in Germany when it was made. The real world where Bastian lives was shot in Vancouver, British Columbia. The Fantasia shots were all filmed in Germany, showcasing elaborately detailed sets built wonderfully with matte painted backgrounds and gorgeous atmospheric elements. They were able to capture the look of being in a fantasy world with so many diverse landscapes, which sets this film apart from a lot of other films that were out at about the same time. One set that was remarkable was the Swamps of Sadness. There are so many gritty details of barren trees, rocks, moss, and gross goopy black mud sprawled around into a vast studio with a matte painted background to fill in the visuals. It provided a tangible space for some of the saddest events of the film to take place. Now, one scene in particular that took over 50 takes in the span of 2 weeks to capture was Atreyu's horse Artax's demise. Wolfgang Petersen took great care to film that scene with the most dramatic impact he possibly could, and it paid off. The scene was so believable that many audience members thought that the production actually killed the horse for the shot. The horse was in no actual danger and did not die on set. The illusion was achieved by training the horse several weeks prior to stay in a built-in mechanical elevator that was beneath the swamp mud to mimic the look of its sinking. One of the most striking visuals was the Southern Oracle Gate Sphinxes. I was in awe when I saw them as a kid. Somehow, I didn't actually notice that the exotic creatures were topless, which caused some negative attention from critics, and even Michael Ende, who flat out called them strippers. I thought they were the coolest thing ever, and I still do. I enjoy them a lot, but I can understand Michael Ende's point of view, and many others. Another striking visual in the film was the childlike empress's abode, the ivory tower. It is breathtaking. And I also love the idea of the ivory tower in terms of the phrase's meaning. A state of privileged seclusion or separation from the facts and practices of the real world. It's the perfect place for this mysterious character and her meaning in the book and the film. The ivory tower scene at the beginning of the film harbors many Easter eggs, such as Gumby, E.T., Yoda, Chewbacca, Mickey Mouse, and the Ewoks, mixed in amongst the Fantasians. Since Fantasia is a place of human fantasies, it would make sense that fictional characters in our real world would live there. What a treat! I think that the film manages to give us a diversity of many characters and creatures, all with expressively distinct personalities and scale. For instance, the rockbiter is a giant next to his tiny friends. And speaking of size, Falkor, what a cool character. He was a 43-foot long puppet with animatronics built in. They used pink fluffy feathers for his fur and about 60,000 pearlescent plastic scales to complete his look. His head alone was about 3 feet tall, and I just loved his unique look, especially his cute little puppy dog face. Now that leads me to the part of the film that receives the most praise and criticism, the creature design and function. And there were many creatures with costumes for actors to wear, and there were many puppets. At the same time, the leader in puppetry arts would be Jim Henson, and for a long time I thought that he was responsible for the work on this film. The work was done by Peterson's in-house team of creators and animatronic specialists. Now, Falco is still beloved to this day and is the pride of Germany. Visitors to Bavaria Film Park in Munich, Germany can ride his back, reliving the iconic scenes from the film. I wanted to talk about the nothing, which was a challenge for the filmmakers to depict on screen. In the book, it's described as more of a vanishing energy, and at least that's how I interpreted it. In the film, we see many shots of a vacuuming storm that sucks everything into a void of space. And I like it. It's in its depiction on screen, we get some of the most incredible cinematic visuals. To achieve the storms, they employed the same technique that was used in Flash Gordon, released in 1980, where colored oil was injected into water tanks and the film slowed down the footage to mimic cloud movements. In one scene, the filmed section was tilted on its side, allowing the debris to fall off screen. All the while, a fixed camera captured the anti-gravity scene as if the wind was blowing fiercely. I love brilliant old school illusions like these. It's just so simple, a lot of money to pull off, but at the same time, they look absolutely incredible in front of the camera. So many moments from the first half of the book did not make it to the big screen, and it was most likely due to the money and time limitations on this film. So here's a little extra trivia that I had no idea of. Steven Spielberg edited the film and helped with the marketing for an American audience as a favor to his good friend Wolfgang Peterson. He was gifted the original Orin from the film, and it now hangs in an enclosed glass display in Steven Spielberg's office. One huge aspect of the film that rivals the film's fame is its music, both the score and the earworm title song. The film's score was beautifully composed by Klaus Doldiger of the German jazz group Passport. The German version of the film featured just the score by Doldiger, but the English release also included the title song composed by the legendary Giorgio Moroder. Keith Forsley wrote the lyrics, and Limahl, the lead singer of the 80s band Kajagoogoo, and Beth Anderson performed the single. Moroder also rescored several of the scenes with his signature synth-pop motifs at the filmmaker's request to appeal to audiences outside of Germany. Both versions have their bonuses. However, I do prefer the mixed score because it's the one I grew up with. Nostalgia wins again. But the basic feeling of the score is a feeling of triumphant flights of flying, soaring through the clouds. It's an incredible and highly uplifting piece of music. Now the performances. Bastian was played by Barrett Oliver, who was about 10 years old during the filming. I think he was amazing at presenting us with a very conflicted boy, excited by his new treasure. He reminds me of myself as a quiet, dreamy little baby nerd girl. And, I have a soft spot in my heart for him. He went on to appear in Daryl in 1985, and one of my favorite movies, Cocoon, in 1985 as well. A big chunk of the weight of the film landed squarely on the shoulders of Atreyu. Nearly every male child actor was up for the role until Noah Hathaway was chosen. Previously, he played the character of Boxy on the television series Battlestar Galactica and was due to appear in the Broadway show Chaplin, starring Gene Kelly and Anne Margaret. He chose to work on the film instead. He was fired when the original director left the project and immediately rehired when Wolfgang Petersen was brought on board. The brave 12-year-old boy sacrificed greatly for his role, mostly performing his own stunts. But for extra pickup shots, Bobby Porter was his stunt double. For the most part, this was at the insistence of Wolfgang Petersen, who felt it was important to have his actors do their own stunts. When it comes down to it, Noah got seriously hurt quite a few times. The worst injury was during the many months of training. He was thrown off his horse, and then it fell on him and injured his back permanently. It crushed 2 of his lower vertebrae, causing poor Noah a lifetime of surgeries and treatment in debt, costing him nearly $1 million in total. To put that into perspective, he was never compensated for his suffrage by the studio. It was only a few years ago in 2008 that his neighbor was nice enough to put up a GoFundMe campaign to help pay for a spinal fusion surgery that cost him $184,000. Whew. That was not the only serious injury on set, unfortunately. His leg got caught on the horse's elevator during the swamp scene, and he was pulled underwater for several minutes. He was unconscious by the time the crew got him out of his predicament. He also almost lost an eye by Gamorre's claws in their fight scene, and the weight of the puppet fell on him and nearly crushed him to death. This poor kid. Now, Noah's accent in the film has undergone criticism for not being consistent. However, during a convention appearance at DragonCon in 2010, he revealed that the production had hired a different actor to dub his lines. A fun fact is that his dad, Bob Hathaway, was also the music editor on this film. Now, just looking at him in this picture, giving every ounce of energy he had to play his character at such a tender age is so admirable and inspiring. After learning about all that he's been through, I would consider him a real-life hero. One of the most striking characters in the film was the childlike Empress. Wolfgang went through great lengths to find a unique child that embodied the majesty of her character. He nailed it when he found 11-year-old Iranian-born Israeli-American dancer Tammy Stronach after 3 auditions. Unfortunately, after landing her role, she suddenly lost her front teeth. Partial dentures were fitted for her, and she painstakingly practiced speaking with them for hours to get rid of the terrible lisp that they caused. There was something so very special about her performance that was mature and regal. Wolfgang spent quite a bit of time directing her performance so she could convey all of the emotions that he wanted us to see on screen. Although she was sought after for more roles in Hollywood, she had no intention in becoming an actor, but continued her career in dance and theater. Now, my enjoyment. The film ends spectacularly, with Bastian giving the childlike Empress a new name of his late mother, Moonchild. Now, that's not your typical name, so it raises a lot of questions about Bastian's mom. Was she just a groovy lady, or was that her birth name? How much of this story was influenced by Endy's curiosity of Native American culture? The film really did well to hint at that, just ever so subtly. I also enjoyed the idea of Bastian being the one to give the childlike empress a new name, because naming something is how we establish things in reality. By labeling something, we claim it, and I love these clever ideas. By naming the empress, he teleports himself to Fantasia and gets to restore it with unlimited wishes. After that, the screenplay had no ending that would actually satiate a film audience, in Wolfgang Petersen's opinion. So that is the problem with splitting up an adaptation of a book. Do you hint at what's next to come, or do you give the audience a happy ending and close the story? Wolfgang Petersen and the production team came up with Bastian returning to the real world with Falkor, chasing 3 bullies into a trash bin as revenge, or retribution, however you want to look at it. The ending sends most viewers into audible cheers of triumph for Bastian. It's really a high point. But this ending was infuriating to the author Michael Ende, because it negated all of the other half of his book that had not been filmed. Bastian seems to have magically mastered his problems in the real world, whereas in the book, it takes a long time and a whole second half of it for Bastian to truly transform in a touching and beautiful fashion. It's really profound. The film also had the finality to it that it seemed to end the never-ending story. Ende was so angry, he refused to have his name in the opening credits and asked for the movie title to be changed. He sold the rights to the studio so they could do whatever they wanted to the property without his approval, and that hurt his feelings, and it would hurt mine too. The production halted when he filed a lawsuit, but ultimately he lost and the film was released. Now, it's always hard and very sad to see that happen, because although I enjoyed the film as it was, I always seem to sympathize with the creators. When it comes to contracts and selling property, not enough creatives know the law or even know how to anticipate what to negotiate. Ende did not withhold his hatred for the movie, vocally blasting the film up until his death in 1995. On the other hand, this movie has been the pride of Germans in the motion picture industry. Upon its release, nearly 5 million Germans watched the film. In America, Warner Brothers released The Neverending Story in the summer of 1984. It was not a financial or critical success. The reviews were very mixed, with either scathing or slightly impressed ones. Even still, the film received many peer awards. The legacy of the film was built in TV and cable airings, as well as home video rentals and purchases. For kids at the time, it was magical. I myself was about a year older than Noah Hathaway and had not yet outgrown my love for puppets and fantasy adventures. In fact, I've never outgrown it. It must have done really well in home video, because the movie studio thought it would be a great idea to make a sequel, The Neverending Story 2, the next chapter. 6 years later, in 1990, without any of the original actors. They were all in their late teens at the time. This film does its own thing, but it adopts more aspects of the second half of the book. And I'd love to review it for you guys one day, because it's actually not a great movie, but it definitely has its sparkles of coolness. And I had fun with it in spite of its obvious flaws. Although I wouldn't recommend it if you are really intolerant of messy films. Now, a third movie, independent of the book, The Neverending Story 3, was released in 1994. Then the Neverending Story animated series of Bastian Balthazar Bucks ran for 2 years and had a total of 26 episodes. Tales of the Neverending Story TV series aired in HBO in 2002 as 4 two-hour television movies in the US and 13 one-hour episodes in the UK. Even though the film didn't follow the book and changed a lot of the nuanced messages, it still has many of its own that landed on many of the viewers that appreciate this movie. When I think about the things that Gomorrah had to say about the manipulators and how they can change the meanings of what humans create, it blows my mind. It's so relevant to the conversation that we're having today. This movie also speaks of how, as a child, we may be more able to access limitless imagination, but as one grows into adulthood, must, quote-unquote, get their heads out of the clouds and take care of their responsibilities. Eventually, the monotony of the daily grind wears down individuals and the imagination to a numb apathy. Now, the manipulators and the nothing are forces that are too strong and big to fight against, but the story focuses on Bastian's mental health as a means of defeating the enemy. The loss of Bastian's mother was another thing that was out of control, and his journey spent some time dealing with his grief and trauma. Sadness can lead to apathy, which can lead to suicidal thoughts and impulses, wanting to give up. And the story doesn't shy away from this topic. It talks about how luck has a big part to play in life. Sometimes it can save you at your lowest point, but it can get you in touch with the right people and get you to where you want to go. There's also an importance of facing one's fears head on, the way Atreyu faces Gomorrah, and later how Bastian deals with his bullies. It talks about the importance of transformation. The real world changed for Bastian when his mother died, so he had to transform in order to move forward. In fact, the world demanded, his father demanded that he change in order to move forward. Fantasia is a metaphor for that transformation, and it gets reinvented in the film. This movie was also a beautifully tender love letter to avid readers, as well as encouraging the idea that reading books is a form of nurturing healthy imagination for good mental health. I love that message. And after seeing this film, I, as a kid, was inspired to seek out the real-life book and read it. And for that, I am eternally grateful for. My rating is an 8.9. Well, that sums up my review, guys. I hope you liked it, and if you did, I've got over 100 of these videos, so go on and browse the channel and see more reviews from me like this. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell icon to be the very first to be notified of my next video. I want to take this moment to also recognize my Patreon supporters who are responsible for helping me to produce these videos. Many thanks to these incredible movie lovers and their support. And remember, you too can be on this list by heading over to Patreon and get a little bit of behind the scenes stuff that you don't get here on YouTube from me. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.